turn.
Welcome everybody. I'm Tim. I know almost all of you already, so I'm Sarah. And we'll talk a little bit more about, I guess, how we got asked to be part of the series in a minute. But I wanted to start off with just introductions. This morning, say your name and maybe if you have like a favorite nature spot in or around Bloomington.
I said Bloomington, but you take that literally. Whatever. There's a handout right there.
Anyone want to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm Jan Nolan, and one of my favorite places is the Smoky Mountains. Oh.
Ben, you ready to go?
My name is Ben, and I really like the Clear Creek Trail. I really like to bike, and that just helps me clear my thoughts a lot.
Okay, I'm Tyler, and staying within Bloomington, I really just like to say my fucking backyard. It's like that's what I'm most familiar with, and we're a few streets down from you in Sherwood Oaks, and so there's a park to the back of us, and the deer come up, and most mornings I can watch them do their thing, and whatever wildlife, maybe the swarm of vultures.
Yeah, which tree will they choose? Same. So I'm Molly, and out our kitchen window, you can see right now, since the leaves are off the trees, you can see down into the farm that's next to Jackson Creek. So like usually we can't see the animals down there, but you can, like with the snow, you can see things running through easier. So it's entertainment.
I'm Amanda, and I would say my favorite nature spot in Bloomington is probably, so there's a creek between the Sherwood Oaks Park and, what's the other one? Olcott, and you can go down into the creek, and it just, when we used to live over there, and when Ben was little, we used to go down and play in the creek all the time. So that's one of my favorite places. As far as like outside of Bloomington, I'm actually a beach person. So I really love the beach in eastern Florida, where we have some friends living in with them and go hang out at the beach.
Great, I'm Stephanie, and one of my favorite, we live on the north side, so one of our favorite places is the Griffey Lake Trails.
I'm gonna let you guys go.
I'm Stephanie, and my favorite is the Ferry Door Trail. What is that called?
Pate Hollow?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, we love it. So Rosie and I discovered that like 5 years ago, and she was like perfect age for it. And we went all the time to check the ferry door if the things in there. I don't know if you guys have been there, but there's a little ferry door trail. It's your name and your favorite spot in Bloomington.
In Bloomington, Levi Gilbert. I would say probably Cascade Park, the waterfall. It's definitely my favorite spot.
Come on in.
You join us, John?
Yeah, I'm cutting.
All right.
Yeah, I'm cutting in a minute.
We'll go so as not to put you directly on the spot.
We're doing introductions.
Do you need a minute?
Favorite nature place in Bloomington?
Yeah, or outside of Bloomington if you need to, whatever.
Okay, I'm Lou. Pressure's on, I'm blinking. Where have I been? Who do I know?
What's your favorite?
Yeah, I think the labyrinth doesn't count, but I do feel very at peace in the labyrinth. Is that?
Yeah, that's true.
That's good.
Or, yeah. I'm Sarah Street. It's so funny because the Jackson Creek Trail is probably my favorite spot in Bloomington because it's what I experience almost every day. And I do love just the creek bed and that the kids can play in it and enjoy just like time to be outside there. It's a good spot.
My name's Tim. I have a hard time picking one. I have a lot. My favorite places are are places often with like spring ephemeral wildflowers, and I think about some of like the Sycamore places and things like that. But I really love the new South Shore Griffey Trail as well, particularly the part where it kind of winds around the rock. And it feels like you're in the Smoky Mountains actually, in that little piece of Griffey, which is really cool. But all right, so I know this is series 2 of this. We were unfortunately not able to be here last week. I know a lot of people weren't as well because of the weather, but we were asked to be part of this with Cooper and Amanda as well, and just talking about creation care, and I guess just some background of who we are is good too. So I and Sarah will talk about her bona fides as well, but I'm the Parks Director for the City of Bloomington, which is a really awesome job, and I really love it. And before that, I spent 10 years as the Associate Director of Bradford Woods and developed a very deep personal connection to the property there and the phenology of the things changing and the nature that we were able to experience there was just really wonderful. And a love of nature has sort of always shaped my worldview and my faith. And determined the line of work that I'm in, for sure. And now with the City of Bloomington, it's really great because I think the Parks Department really gets to do a lot in terms of creation care and sort of like leading the way on some of our actual practical sustainability efforts. So we get to be in charge of all the city's urban forest, and we have an urban forester, and we get to work towards things like increasing our urban canopy and getting rid of our calorie pairs around town, which we're in year 3 of our plan to eliminate like 1,200 calorie pairs. It's a big task. And working on, we have weed wrangles and people who fight invasive species and promote natives, and Cascades is a great place to see the efforts of those folks. And as well as just, Space for All Species, which is a Charlie Harper poster I have in my office about, parks aren't just for people, they're for all these other things too. You go to Miller Showers and you get to see the waterfowl that come through. And it's a really lovely way to be able to sort of work on stewardship. My plan is not to talk a lot about City of Bloomington today. We're going to talk more about being observant and paying attention and how that's sort of the foundation for care.
Yeah, so I got to live at Bradford Woods for 10, 11 years and not work there, so it was just my home, which was lovely. So that became, a really special time in life to just be really connected with nature, and especially I felt like in the winter it was really easy to go outside every day, and I find it's more difficult now when there's like nothing to do, or it feels like that anyway. So, and we raised our kids there for the first greater half of their life. They're 11 and 9 now, but most of their years were spent at Bradford Woods. So, just grateful for all the time they get to spend, outside being little forest kids. My background also is I have a degree in environmental science and did sort of environmental policy at the O'Neill School at SPIA when I was there. But, and then I worked for the state government in the Environmental Regulatory Agency called IDEM. So I worked on like air permitting and basically regulating companies that pollute the air. So all that to say that like environmental policy, environmental care has always been something on my mind. But we, I think today our main thrust is to talk about like how do we engage with nature as people, created beings in this world, and how do we connect on a daily basis with it, pay attention, which we'll get to. I think so often the idea of saving the planet or creation care ends up being a list of 25 things or 100 things that you should be buying, should not be buying, should be doing, should not be doing. And it can quickly get overwhelming. Not to say all of those things aren't exactly what we should be doing, but I think for us, it starts with care and connection to the natural world. So that's kind of where we're going today, and I hope to hear from all of you about kind of like your experience with that. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I and Kyla, she, her pronouns.
Great. And we shared our favorite nature spot in Bloomington, or it doesn't have to be in Bloomington.
I would say favorite nature spot in Bloomington would be either the peninsula at Lake Monroe or Cascades. Yeah.
So we're going to start today by reading a poem by Mary Oliver. And if you're not familiar with her, that's okay. Would anyone like to read a poem? And that's okay.
I can read it.
Awesome.
All right. The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is your plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Thanks. Beautiful. So the next 3 lines that I pulled also from Mary Oliver are from a different poem, a much longer poem, which I've also included in your packet, which we won't read together, but I thought I'll include the source material, so if you want to read that one later. But there's these 3 lines from the poem Sometimes called Instructions for Living a Life, Pay Attention, Be Astonished, Tell About It. And I feel like the poem that Stephanie just read exemplifies that, right? So we just kind of want to talk about like those 3 things: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it, and get a sense of like how can we do those things, what are barriers that we face to doing those things. So our first question is, how can we better pay attention to the natural world? And I purposely made these very open-ended.
I think it's really easy to just get stuck in our houses and in our jobs and all the stresses of daily life. And like, so we have lots of small children. And
Again.
they're getting to that age, like the toddler age is so fun to experience life, especially outdoors with kids. And I feel like they pay attention to all the things that we're just in a hurry. Like, come on, let's walk. We're on this walk, we're walking, and they're like looking at the grasshopper and paying attention. And I think like seeing the world through a little kid's eyes is so cool. Because if you really slow down and you pay attention, it's like you notice things and you realize. I mean, I love being outdoors, and I don't get out enough because I have 3 kids under 3, and it's hard to get them out the door. But when you do, I mean, I feel this like huge sense of peace that I stop worrying about like my house being dirty and the giant to-do list, and you can just look at a grasshopper. And I don't know, I love doing that.
I also think there's something to be said for novelty, which is I think sometimes whenever we like see the same view over and over, we start to take it for granted, or we start to kind of get bored with it. And so intentionally like making opportunity to experience some new part of nature is important. And like it doesn't have to be dramatic, right? Maybe it's like a different park in town or something, or you know, one thing that we have not done a great job with as a family is like experiencing the different kind of natural environments, even within the US, right? Like there's such a variety from New England to the, Southwest and Pacific Northwest and, all of that. So we can do better about that. But I think that, it hits me sometimes, which I travel a lot for my job. Joel we'll hear more about next week. If we come back. Shameless plug. And I travel all over the world, and so I found myself in places like, you know, in Savannah, in Kenya, and just looking around and being like struck by how different it is from my life and how wonderful and amazing. But I try to find those opportunities to be struck without having to like go to the other side of the world. It was really expensive. But yeah, so I think there's something to be said for like intentionally creating opportunities for like novelty. Because it's easier to notice, I think, when things are new. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it allows us to appreciate what is common to us too. You know, when you return from a different landscape, you can appreciate what we have here around us. I also think like creating a habit of being in nature, like where you can notice change in nature, is important to be in touch with what that looks like. You know, seeing, if you go on a daily walk, you know, seeing the changes that happen on that daily walk, or if you're, you know, always in the same location at a certain time of day, seeing how the light changes at that time of day. I think those are important ways to understand what's happening and observe, you know, unusual changes, something that's surprising about that space too.
I think kind of on that theme too is the change of seasons in Indiana. You know, what we have the opportunity to, I mean, the snow may be difficult, but it's so beautiful, and the spring flowers coming and the beautiful colors of the trees and all that, that's just, I like to go to some of the same places every season, like down to the lake, you know, or something, and just see, you know, how different things look at that time.
I agree. I love the seasons. I've never not lived in Indiana, so I'm like, what is it like to always have summer or whatever, you know?
Well,
I appreciate the seasons.
and I lived in Nebraska for 28 years, and they have change of seasons, but it's not a
Different.
deal.
Yeah. Right.
You have a lot of yellow in the fall, not much red and orange, you know, so it's not the same everywhere, yeah.
Kind of your comment made me think about, I think I made a comment before you came about like phenology. So PHEN, phenology is the study of like the timing of nature, right? Like what do we expect? What do we know? What do we see? You know, and I was thinking about one of my favorite things to do to pay attention is to just listen. I got into birding a number of years ago, and like photography, I've always liked photography and stuff too, but like the way you find birds most of the time is by listening, not by actually seeing them. And so obviously barriers are like, if we're always got our podcast in, you know, we're listening to a podcast about how to save the planet, but we're not paying attention, it's like, maybe take a step back. Not that podcasts are wrong, I do it all the time too, but like for example, like hearing on my run a couple weeks ago, the first driving blackbird, that's back. So like the males come back in like early February, which is seems crazy. It's so early, it's so snowy, but like they come back to clean their territory, and you hear that first one, and it's like that always sparks joy in me. Like, oh, there's like spring coming, and then I always listen for like Eastern Phoebe. I always will text Sarah when I hear the first Phoebe of the year because it's like I love that. Like it's like oh, spring is coming. But I love like paying attention to the timing of things and building that like it's like an old friend too. Like coming back to you get to see like the first harbinger of spring or whatever wildflower.
Yeah.
It's brings me a lot of joy.
Another one we pay attention to a lot is like the monarchs. Like when you see your first monarch butterfly, which I always feel like is later than what you would think.
You know, it's kind of scares me.
I know, yeah.
I think a barrier for me in paying attention is I always feel like I have to have some purpose to go out and to leave my house. I'm like, well, am I gonna go for a walk? Am I gonna read something? And then I'm ridiculous. I'm like, well, what if I get bored of this book? So I should bring multiple. And then I end up with 4 books. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll want to study. And then I'll need a pencil and a pen. And do it on my laptop. And so I was convicted when in the poem it said like she knows how to be idle and blessed. Because I never just go out just to like exist in nature. I have to bring like my backpack again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's like such a barrier just with our society. Like we're always supposed to be productive, and I fight this so bad because like I'm really good at being productive. I can make a to-do list and get it all done. And like, but yeah, then I'm like, well, I didn't enjoy anything about my day, but I did do all of these things that I want you to notice. But right, like I just think that's. We don't pay attention because we're just always busy doing.
I completed the 5-mile hike, but I didn't notice anything on it.
Right, exactly. Like, check, did that.
How many steps did you get?
Right, exactly. Yeah, like,
Did you get 10,000?
yeah. Plus, I, listen to these 3 podcasts, so now I know this stuff, and look what I accomplished. Like, why does that have to be that?
Kind of in the last section on this page, these aren't things we have to go through here. They were just sort of my brainstorming ideas or ways to pay attention. But I put in the like Norwegian concept of friluftsliv, which is literally translates to free air life. And so the concept there is like be outside. Like what can you do outside that you're doing inside, right? So like you can do your work, your schoolwork outside, like that's okay, like we can still be productive, but like still putting ourselves in a place, like have your meal outside. Obviously we're not doing that in February, but just again, trying to think of like, how can we put ourselves in a place where we have the opportunity to pay attention? And it's okay if we're still doing other things. Any other barriers? And we kind of jumped to that question, but I think we said this already, but the phone is certainly one for me. Like, yeah, I don't know. I genuinely like listening to audiobooks, so I don't know. Sometimes it is like a help for me to like have that like thing that I'm doing on my walk, but I wish I could do silence a little bit more.
So I feel like, Mandy, you talked about like astonishment, like seeing like the savannah and like wanting to find it closer. So how do we find astonishment in like the familiar? I think that's a tough question too.
Yeah.
I have one. Does anybody have orchids in your house? Okay.
I have like
I'm
an orchid
impressed that
stem.
you do.
Prepare to be
Yes, someday maybe.
As a teacher in May, I am given like gifts of plants and flowers,
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
I love it. I am not a green thumb, but you'll find in my kitchen window some orchid stems. Their leaves stay green usually, but anyway, I just kind of pretend like they're living and and then suddenly I turned the smallest one around to find that it had 9 little buds on it. 9, and so I posted about it on Facebook. I was like, astonished, right? So anyway, 2.5 of them have bloomed. And so it's kind of silly, but it goes with how to tell about it. Like, I'm excited about it. It's like, I didn't really do anything. I put, water from the fish aquarium in there, and I think that's probably it, but I don't know.
Good tip.
Nutrients.
Yeah,
Makes mental
so
note.
it's just little stuff like that. Like, I notice it every day. That's the same window where I can look out and see nature and turkey vultures and whatnot. But I tend to, I'm kind of skipping to the next question, I guess, is about telling about it. I have gotten to where I don't post on Facebook because it's, nothing, rarely on there is there's like I'm not in the mood to post something positive and kind of silly or mundane when there's so much like else going on. And so I just recently I think about all the people that might see it, like elderly people that from the church I grew up in are on Facebook, and it will brighten their day if I share this orchid, maybe. So I don't do enough of that, but it's a kind of reframe. And just, I was thinking about something else back up here. We used to go to Tinker Garden class when the girls were little. I don't think it's offered here anymore, but Bloomington has all the things to do. I mean, you're a big part of that, but also there's just nature camps and everything. That's my biggest complaint about Bloomington is not being able to do all the fun stuff that's offered, especially for kids. So that's a good problem to have. Yeah. There's a place called Soulcraft, and they do like a sit spot where you're paying to be there on this land, and you can do it at home too. I haven't actually done it, but a spot is like your spot where you do sit and listen, journal or whatever. So these are things I'm storing away for the future to do.
I think it's helpful to have something to like look out for or be excited about. Like I saw 2 foxes run across the cul-de-sac in our neighborhood the other day, and I was so excited about these 2 foxes. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I thought immediately of the chickens. But I think like I love owls, but I never see owls, and I just like wait to maybe hear an owl. Think maybe there is an owl, just the idea of like something that you don't get to see all the time being out there, that helps with the astonishment factor. I think when you do either get to hear or see one of those things, it's exciting.
I feel like, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, like, again, this is my worldview right now, but I'm a mom of little kids, and again, it's like, I feel like it's my job to help them learn to be in love with nature and astonished by the mundane and things like that. So, like, planting seeds is so fun with little kids because they're experiencing that for the first time, and tapping the maple trees in our yard, like it's things like that. Like this tree's always here, but now it's like giving us maple syrup. And these are things we did better when we had 1 kid. I'm like, we should do that again. But yeah, just being astonished by our own backyard because it does change through the seasons, and we can like grow food and flowers and get maple syrup, and it's really cool. And I'm astonished by it still. Like I'm always excited when the first bloom in the flower, like in the flower bed, or the first vegetable pops up. It's always so exciting. And I take a picture of it usually and put it on Facebook. I'm like, look, we've got carrots, baby carrots, or whatever it is.
I think that's great. I think it's great to like post those things. That's the telling about it, right? Like Facebook's not a great place always, right? Yeah. Social media in general is not great, but that's the things I want to see from you guys.
Yeah.
I'm like, I still hold on to Facebook because I'm like, I like still having connections to like people who I wouldn't otherwise, some high school and college friends and stuff like that, and seeing their families, but also just seeing the like fun things that happen and what people notice and see.
Yeah, I like the word the mundane things. I'm happy to see some mundane things that are just like part of life.
Yeah.
I think that all kind of talks to the power of storytelling with regards to, how we relate to nature. I'm seeing, later here on your list, there's a Wendell Berry quote reference. Wendell Berry lives in my head rent-free all the time.
Yeah.
And I recontextualize things through, the way that he talks about life in fiction and in nonfiction, but telling about the time of the year by where the corn is at, mouse ears or something, like just changing the way that we think about our relation, man's relation to nature. And I think about how we, kind of make characters of the animals around the house or around, our home and things like that. Like we talked about the owls. Hearing the owls at night when they're around. I was coming back home several years ago around midnight, and there was a fox by your yard before you moved in. I think that there was a fox eating pears in the middle of the road, and I had to just stop there in my car and think, is this guy really there? Like, you know, he's just standing there in the middle of the road eating pears. And it just felt really surreal. And that was my story for the next week or longer, I guess, if I'm telling it now. But I just like, you know, framing ourselves like that, not just in a world of people, you know, like the busy town, you know, people and their jobs. It's the, you know, the nature and where we are, where we're contained within.
Those are all animals in busy towns. So it's
Well,
good.
maybe it's okay. Yeah.
I think the first time I grew conscious of where I lived is I had a friend move from California, and in the summer she was like asking me why the trees were screaming. I'd never heard cicadas before.
That's awesome.
And ever since then I've been like, that is what that is.
The trees
Yeah.
are screaming.
Right. That's normal actually, yeah. And then she saw like fireflies for the first time, and she's like, that's amazing. And I was like, I should appreciate these things more, because they're really cool, and they're very specific to where we are in space, you know, in the Midwest.
I do think there's like, you know, it's kind of a parody, right? And I actually love to see kind of the parodies of like living in the Midwest, right? And it's like, there's all these jokes about it. But, you know, we have lived outside of the Midwest and chose to come back here, right? And that was intentional for lots of reasons. But, you know, one of them was this is the natural landscape at which like we feel most comfortable and at home and that we want as a part of our life. Not to say that others in other parts of the country are beautiful, but like this is the one that we chose, right? And I think that it's so funny. It's a stereotype, but you know, Matt and I both grew up in Indiana. Other than our brief stint on the East Coast, have lived here our whole lives. And like we still, when we're driving, like we have to do the thing where we like see cows and we're like cows, right? Of like we literally see these all the time, or horses, or whatever it is, right? It's a trope, but we do it. We still do it. Of noticing and pointing that out, and I think even then it's like telling about it, right? Even if it's like in our car, just like seeing that thing and being excited and noticing it and sharing it, or you know the thing like. I don't know if anybody else's parents always do this. Whenever you leave the house, they say watch for deer.
Yeah.
Like, is that a thing that anybody else grew up with? Okay, so like both of our parents, when we leave, especially at night, it's always watch for deer, right? And when we would come home from college and we would have friends with us who weren't from the Midwest, and they would hear our parents say that, they were just completely like flabbergasted about what are we talking about? And it was understanding, having to explain that like this is such a ubiquitous part of our life here, that you have to be aware and, you know, all of these things. And it was just like, wait, this wild animal is like such a part of your life that your parents feel the need to remind you to watch out for these things. Yeah. I just think it's like, there's all of these sort of bits about living in the Midwest that are true and they're funny, but it's also like, yeah, and this is our chosen place for a reason. And so sharing that as we can, especially with people who maybe aren't from around here, is important and fun, and it's always fun to like see people's reactions. Or I remember when we lived on the East Coast that gets very few tornadoes, there was a tornado warning, and my coworkers are freaking out. And I'm like, guys, it's fine. Like, go to the basement, go to the thing, and I actually like walked out of the building because I was like, I'm gonna go, and they were just like, get out of here, and I was like, guys, it's not a big deal. You know, it's fine. But for people who have very rarely or never experienced a tornado warning, you know, they're like, we're all gonna die. So I think it's just like those experiences shape us and how we interact with the world, how we interact with other people. And yeah, I think that living in the Midwest is its own like, unique experience.
That's like a stereotype of the Midwestern dad. He goes out to look and find the tornado. When he's in the basement.
That's always my dad.
That's right.
Yeah, literally like golf ball size hail is falling
In
out.
the basement when we go to.
Yeah.
I remember like a day in Bloomington 10 years ago when the sirens went off like 7 times, and you're like, all right, come on.
Maybe they should.
We're not taking it seriously.
Yeah, we're not taking it seriously. Your comment about like deer set off a chain of thoughts in my head, but like thinking about how paying attention can also be like how we know a place and we like come back to it, we know it intimately, and we like start to learn and understand the natural history of it too is really interesting. Like Indiana, like sometimes I'll take students from IU out in the Hoosier National Forest. We'll talk about the natural history and how we came to have the natural forest because of all the poor farming practices. And if it wasn't a forest, it was all gone, it's all regrown. And the fact that like at one point in Indiana, deer were extinct, right? Like in Indiana, they were extirpated by hunting. Same thing with hawks. And now we play like a family road trip game where we like count hawks, like as a way of trying to pay attention. Some days are better than others.
I literally cannot imagine Indiana without deer.
Yeah, right. Isn't that crazy? But that's something to pay attention to too, like in the federal government we are in, and what do they want to undo from the successes that we've made with, starting with Rachel Carson, who wrote about DDT and the bird eggs, and that's how we have raptors and got bald eagles back now. Deer came back, just all these different practices that have been good that we have to pay attention to make sure we continue to take care of. That was a tangent, sorry.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good point, right? Is it's paying attention not only to the nature itself, but like what are the external factors that are going to impact that, right? Whether that's legislation or urban expansion or things like that. Is all of these things are interconnected, and so it's not just about like noticing the nature itself, but noticing what's going on in the broader world that's going to have an impact, whether positive or negative, and how we engage with and interact with those things as well, right?
Yeah.
Policy or whatever it is, like if we are prioritizing the significance of the place of nature and the natural world in our lives, that lends itself to engagement these other ways too. Which again, we'll talk more about next week.
I know. I love that. That's great.
I've been thinking about the sense of place thing. I also love Littleberry. I feel like my grandma is Hannah Coulter. Like when I read those books, I'm like, this is my family. And I wanted nothing to do with Indiana when I was a kid. Like I was like, I cannot wait to get out of Indiana. Like that was my feeling. So I didn't make it very far, but I moved to Tennessee and lived there for 15 years, and then moved back, and like did not want to live in Brown County, which is where I grew up. I was like, not Brown County. But we ended up buying a house like 1 minute into Brown County.
You got a couple toes in there.
we basically live in Brown County. But I'm a person who loves to move. This is a weird thing. We moved 11 times in like 11 years because I just like it. But it's weird, and I don't want to move now. But when we bought our house, I mean, like I felt the itch to move, and I remember like reading about this. Like you can't know. Like I was reading some Littleberry thing about knowing your place and the place in the world, and kind of made this decision. Like, okay, like, this is where I landed, and this is where I am, and it's pretty cool because my grandpa farmed all the land around where we are. Like it was very unintentional to live where we are, but like he farmed the farms behind us, and he's the person who had the poor farming practices that got rid of all the deer. And like I remember he used to, he didn't get rid of the deer, and they weren't gone when he was there. But I'm just saying, like he would see all the fields that are now forests, and he would, before he passed away, he would be like, that is just such a shame. Like that is such a shame that these fields are now forests, you know? So I grew up with that mindset, like the farming mindset, little man. But now it's like, no, it's beautiful that these are forests. But I don't know, I feel like I really am starting to understand the place where I am, because my family's, both sides of my mom's family's homesteads are under the lake. So like the lake is very, it's like a sore subject in my family. It always has been, and they farmed, so they lost all this land and then had to like rent it from the state. And it was all in flood zones. But now no one in my family is farming. But I don't know, I just feel like maybe I landed here for a reason, and I'm raising my kids in the same place like my family's been raised for generations. And I don't know, I'm just noticing it and finding beauty in it instead of being like, I can't wait to get out of here. There's nothing here in India. I don't know. I love our little corner of the world.
We're glad you're here.
I'm taking care of my little corner. Thanks. Yeah, like, I don't know. It's neat. We've been in our current house 6 years, which is the longest I've ever lived in any place in my entire life. So, I know.
It's also a lot harder to move with 4 kids.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, our house
Pretty
is
bad.
teeny tiny and we are just on top of each other, but I'm like, we're not. Like,
Yeah.
we got a great yard. I don't want to.
How are we on time?
Again, I'm always dubious on what time we should start and end this, but like 11:40 we should probably end, right?
When our kids start coming up.
Yeah, right.
Like finding us, like, how do we know we're supposed to be done?
Or your list, or?
I wanted to share, yeah, like you can see I shared just like a couple things. I wanted to provide some clarity on some of these, just, and you can think about them later when you go home. This Homegrown National Park, which is like the 5th point down, is from this book, Nature's Best Hope. So Homegrown National Park is like, how can you make your yard into a vibrant, thriving ecosystem? So one thing we've been working on is killing our grass, and we're gonna plant a bunch of native plants. And Tim is very well versed on native plants of Indiana, so if you ever are like, hey, what should I plant? He's probably got like a list. So that's what that one is. It's a great book. We talked about nature, journaling, phenology.
I was gonna say, Doug Townley wrote this. I forget where he is. He has another book that's actually more specific about like your backyard too. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I'll look it up.
Is it the Backyard Homestead? No, it's not that one.
I'll look it up.
Okay. One thing I didn't add to this list that I was thinking about is having a nature collection. And for those of you that are parents, this has worked really well for our kids. Like Lincoln and Edie each have their own box that's like their things they collect. And I also kind of practically got a box because they can't have more than the box. So like if there's something you got that's like better than what's in there, then we replace it or whatever, so that it doesn't just become this free-for-all, there's stuff everywhere, right? And have a rock collection. And even Edie this morning was like going through her rock collection and looking at the fossils, and she has this one rock that she got from the Smoky Mountains, which is like the greatest thing that she could possibly have in her possession, just like this one little thing, and she remembers it. So I feel like for us, the nature collection also is connected to story, like connected to our experiences and memories, right? So we can pull out an item and be like, oh yeah, I remember when, like, whatever, this thing happened. So I think if anybody came into our house and like saw our nature collection, they might think that I'm a witch. So I'm just gonna say I'm not a witch. I just like rocks and minerals and all those things. And skulls, we have some skulls.
Do you take pictures of them too, for when they get lost?
I haven't
Have
done
the
that.
special rock that they take to nature camp?
Oh, right. Yeah, if they get lost.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know. And Lincoln has like a massive just stick collection in
Yeah.
our garage. I'm like, how many of these do we need, buddy? Yeah, and resonates. So just, yeah, I love like fostering that kind of stuff, and you can do it as an adult too. Like find cool sticks or pieces of bark or whatever, and like put it in a spot that helps you remember. So, sorry, did you figure?
Bringing nature home is the one that Doug Townley wrote that's specifically about like how to like help your yard be a haven for. It all starts with the insects, right? Like, and then food chain it on up for all the other animals from there.
Does it have bits about coexisting with yellow jackets?
Ooh, that's a fun one.
Yeah. Do you have like highly allergic?
Our neighbors are highly allergic.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should have a,
I know, we could have a conversation about that.
yeah.
What can you kill?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, anything else?
Anything you want to
I'm
talk
gonna
about?
talk about books.
I don't know, just some things you've
One
got
other book
together.
we brought was the Cloud Spotters
Oh, yes.
Guide. You guys, this book will change your life.
This one.
Learning the names of clouds. And that's like, you know, we've talked about birds are everywhere and all the time. Clouds,
Even more so.
like, are also everywhere and all the time. And like, literally, we'll be driving, it's like, oh, look at that cloud. Like, I don't know. It's a great thing to pay attention to.
Yeah. Right. And this guy's very funny too when he writes this book. It's kind of like tongue-in-cheek British humor. I don't know what else. Breeding Sweetgrass. I know several people in here already recognized. Talked about this. This is wonderful.
Oh, Richard Loop, this is great for parents too. Like, so Last Child in the Woods, like he talks about like the child in nature being an extinct species or like soon to be extinct species. And so it's a lot about like, how do we get kids out in nature? And one thing I pulled from this like ideas way to pay attention from him too was like, he had like a discussion group with a bunch of kids and they shared how learning the names of what they were seeing, whether it's a flower or a tree or all of that, like helped them connect with it. So like knowing its name helped them feel like it was a friend. You know, like I mean, that's the same thing with people, right? Like when you know someone's name, you're connected to them in a different way. So there's all kinds of ways to do that. And I know there are apps that can do that, right? Like I use Seek sometimes for like flowers and stuff, which is fine. Even though we talked about not having your phone, but I feel like that's helpful. So.
Our oldest kid has names for all the trees in our yard
Yeah.
based on their actual names. So she calls like Old Sick, which is the sycamore, or Maggie, which is our magnolia tree. And yeah, they're her friends.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
She's fun.
I'm going to put a plug in for Scott Russell Sanders, who is local. He's from Bloomington. He lives on Fess, like just south of campus. And he's kind of akin to a Wendell Berry in his writing. And when we went and saw Wendell Berry
too at you.
Yeah.
It was like he was the reason Wendell came.
Yeah, all those years ago, Scott was like there with him.
Are these books all on the list?
Yes, these are all on the list. And then the other one is, Claire Walker Leslie has like 1 million books about keeping a nature journal. And so if you are artistically inclined, like stuff like this is amazing, but she does a good job of making it really accessible and not making it feel like you have to be the most artistic person. Keeping a nature journal or phenology can also involve zero art. Like I literally keep Gmail drafts of like first red-winged blackbird, February, whatever, you know, and then like revisit that year after year and like, oh, that was later in February the year before, or we saw this on this day. So it doesn't have to be like super elaborate, but nature journaling can be a way to help connect and keep that sort of like year-round cycle of keeping track of things and noticing things. That was another one. She's one of my favorites.
I have one last book I can't believe I forgot to bring. Aldo Leopold is one of my favorite authors ever. He worked for the U.S. Forest Service from like the 1920s to the late 40s, I think. Kind of the dawning of some ecological awareness, and he was a big part of that. And he owned a farm in Wisconsin and basically wrote a book called Sand County Almanac, because it was in Sand County. That's basically just his like phenological observations of the farm, but it is very poetic and very beautiful. And it's like you can read March, and it's like, oh yeah, this is March here too. It resonates with Indiana. He's great. Final thoughts, we should.
Thank you, everyone.
Closing prayer.
Sure.
God, thank you for this group today. Thank you for the wonderful and amazing beauty of your creation, the complexity, the systems, the way things work together that we don't even understand. We pray that you would give us a sense of wonder, the time and the inclination to sit and to take it in and to appreciate what has been created and to protect it for those to come. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys.